end of the day, we don't need to have social determinants of health. We could eliminate all of them. It's policy decisions that create those things, and it's policy decisions that can end those disparities. So, when folks say, oh, I want to live in a safer community, I want to increase the policing budget, I'm like, actually not policing in itself that's going to create that safer community.
Yeah.
What you need is people who aren't desperate for resources.
Kayla, Barb, welcome to the studio.
Hey, Dan, thanks for
Hey,
having us.
Dan.
Yeah, we've got a lot of ground to cover today, so let's just jump right into it.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Kayla, by the end of June 2025, Saskatchewan Fire had responded to more than 1,200 opioid poisonings. This doesn't include the numbers from PHR or other community organizations. Can this growing level of service response be maintained?
Absolutely not. The pressure that it has put on our emergency services has been unbelievable. I'm very grateful that we have such open communication with emergency services here. And so, we can regularly get updates from each other and keep each other, informed. If something's going on, then it's just a text and say, hey, we've seen this today. But it's not just, fire and ambulance. It's, then being brought in to emerge, having to be treated there as well. So, the strain that it's put on our emergency services, the cost is astronomical. I'm sure we're already, probably in the 100,000 range of, cost to this point. There's no way to sustain this. And every time fire, EMS are having to reply to one of those calls, they're being pulled away from, everything else. And, at the highest, it's been about 20 overdoses in 24 hours. So, not only do they have to attend to those calls, it's every other emergency in the city. And, fire and EMS often go to calls together. And, so the impact is beyond what we see in our community. This is affecting service delivery for everyone.
Have we seen circumstances where other emergencies had gone unattended?
That I don't know. I can say that, in one of the peak times, those weeks where we see a little bit more, and this happened, I don't remember when it was, February, March probably, where we were attending to 6 overdoses at the same time at the building. That same exact time, fire was attending 10. So they, it's not always a call this hour and a call that hour. And so we're calling for help. They're trying to get somebody over to us. They're dealing with 10 other situations and then who knows what other emergencies. And, we already don't have enough EMS to hit all the emergencies. And so, at that very moment to be that in demand, I'm sure, and this is just speculation, that there is, there would be some collateral, there would be other things happening.
Yeah.
I know that day, because there was so much going on at the same time and emergency services was trying to deal with all of it, they sent an EMS and an SUV to just come and help us because that was what they could do at the time. And, some of the overdoses are taking a very long time to reverse. It's not the same that it was. So, every minute adds to dollars, it adds to response times, all of those things.
Yeah. You mentioned that your staff was responding to 6 overdoses at one time. I can't imagine the level of chaos that must have been in that moment. How do you even get through that? And that sort of leads me to something, that I wanted to touch on was the shutdown. And maybe we can just touch on that for a minute.
Yeah, the shutdown that we did was completely self-preservation.
Yeah.
It's that exhaustion. During that time, we didn't have paramedics actively on site. We were in the process of obtaining new paramedics. And so, it's all, the staff in the building trying to rally together. Monday, Tuesday this week, we had 10 overdoses in total at the building. So it, again, that pressure is there. It's been, much more balanced as far as pressure with the 2 paramedics on site again. But, I got messages this week that was like, I'm having like PTSD, where I'm like back in that horrible time and there's overdoses happening all the time. I don't know how to deal with the emotions. And so, we are trying to offer as many supports and flexibility as we can, try and do what we can to give staff, extra time. Like with this weekend, with the stat being on Tuesday, we're going to take Monday as well and allow a longer weekend. But, that only does so much. And then there's a guilt aspect to that, because that's a day, that's 2 days, 4 days in a row that we're not open. So what happens when we're not there? And, from a, supportive boss, side of things, it's, we can't take responsibility for that. I feel just as guilty, as they do. And it's the same fear, like we lock the doors at 4 and then what's going to happen? Yeah. And that's when the people we support have been dying. As of this week, we're at 22 people who have passed away, not all from overdose, but 18 of them are. So there's also like heavy grief, especially knowing that, people that access the building every day, one of them was found face down in a pile of mud that night. So, there is a lot of guilt, and that's a lot of pressure. We've always had a very stressful work environment. All of our departments are crazy busy all the time. But we now have about 300 people a month accessing that building. Wow. And our drop-in's like the size of the room we're sitting in, right?
Yeah,
so it's just that constant pressure, more and more people trying to take care of everyone all the time, because that's who we are as human beings. If we didn't want to take care of everyone, we probably wouldn't be here. And, the staff every day, it's just kind of day to day, seeing where people are at, what we can do, all of those things. But, this is something that we've never dealt with here before. And, this has been happening for a long time in, like Vancouver and Toronto in larger settings. But it is so difficult, especially because we are so restricted on other resources, and there's nowhere to really transition people to. There's no service delivery models where we can go, okay, they overdosed today, they're homeless, they, have these mental health needs. Let's move them into that supportive, living situation or whatever it may be, a very quick access to the resources that they need, because that does make a difference in what choice looks like and what they're able to do. And we don't have that, right? We have people coming back every day in the same situation. It's exhausting for them.
Have you seen a shift in public support?
For us, no. There is something really magical about living in Saskatchewan. Despite the government challenges that we have, the people of Saskatchewan are a very special group of people. And the public support has been, insane. For us, it's that financial piece. And we just launched a campaign.
I saw that.
To raise $300,000 because our building is literally sinking. It's the northwest corner is about 2 feet lower than it should be.
2 feet?
Yeah. We have 5 joists that are rotted in that corner of the building that we need to fix. We have all the water from the back alley and, that whole area behind us all drains to that corner of our building. And so we're in, need of
2 feet.
Oh yeah,
that's like I can't even get that on my screen right now.
It's crazy. And you go into the basement, it looks like a horror movie when you look at that wall. Like our basement isn't super fancy anyway. We've put out this campaign We're asking for $100,000 for the building repairs. We, asked for $100,000 for our employment program. Almost everybody that works in that drop-in are people that access services. And now, more than we've ever had, we have people ready for full-time employment. And so we've started looking at other opportunities for some of the folks who want to, branch out their skills. We have somebody who really wants to work with youth. And so, then we're looking at, is there a place in our youth homes where you could do some mentorship? But we have people who are working anywhere from a couple hours a week to now 40 hours per week. We pay them on the same scale that everybody else at our organization pays. So it's not cheap to do, but we're very passionate about equal pay, and they're running that building. And, so we're needing more financial support for that. And then just like general operations, we have to keep the lights on, we have to keep the heat on, we have to have money for our HVAC system. We have a customized HVAC system for the safe consumption site. And we've worked with Boss Plumbing for 1 million years because I had to rebuild the system after the first group failed. And, so it's a high maintenance system and it's not one where you can just like order a part on Amazon usually. So, we really need that support. The public support we get, not only financially, but just that, culture around this is really important.
Yeah.
And, it is unbelievable what we have here in Saskatchewan. And, I can't describe it. There's no words to just describe like how crazy it is here, despite the politics that are going on.
Yeah.
Nobody else in Canada has this support.
Yeah.
Like we have a woman and some of her friends who cook, large batches of soup and freeze it and bring it. They're called the soup ladies.
Oh, yeah.
And the one that brings it, there's even been questions by her family members around like, is it actually safe for you to go over there? And, she is so safe there. Like people get so excited when she pulls up, everybody helps unload, everybody knows her, the staff all know her. And so, that little piece is wonderful, when we have groups of people who are saying, I'm part of this quilting group or crochet group, and we're going to make a bunch of blankets and toques and mitts. There's, just this idea here where, we have to rely on each other and everybody has to chip in. And yeah, it is magical here.
What supports are most important for frontline workers to keep them well when working in harm reduction?
The thing that we need the most as frontline organizations is we need the financial support to put the resources in place. Like I said, we need lots of flexibility. We have a great partnership with Evolve Counseling. Our staff get in really quickly for resources, but we pay for all of it. And so, that support for staff wellness, we see that, lingo everywhere, but that really needs to be built into our funding contracts and supported so that we can offer everything we can. Nothing's free. So, that understanding from people who have the money that should be part of every contract.
Barb, you've proposed a substance use stabilization framework built on 4 pillars: housing, safe supply, treatment, and decriminalization. Can you walk us through what that actually looks like in practice?
Absolutely. It's and I don't feel like I invented it. There's been a lot of advocates in research and of course in community services and CBOs who have been talking about these sort of foundational pillars for a long time around what supports are needed. Of course, all those things are also needed on the background of like harm reduction services, right? So, so in that graphic, like I have a fancy graphic, because sometimes giving a visual helps people sort of see how all these things
we'll put it
are
on
connected.
screen.
Absolutely,
It'll be on screen. It's actually on screen right now.
Fantastic. So everyone can see there that like harm reduction is like the center, right? And what we're hearing from Kayla is really about that full spectrum of what harm reduction can mean. A lot of times, folks think about substance use harm reduction as sterile needle provision, and it is that, but it's also toques and mitts. It's the soup ladies coming in to give soup. It's that building that sense of community care and belonging for individuals so that you can continue to connect them with additional services. So that background harm reduction needs to be in place and it needs to be supported and funded. Then additionally, we're talking about things like decriminalization, and I'll start there. It's really hard to build trust and relationship with folks when they're being criminalized for what is a health concern, right? Substance use, we've tried for over 80 years, this war on drugs approach.
And now we're trying even harder.
Oh, yeah. We're leaning in, and we're like, let's just criminalize more and we're sure the outcome will be different. And I'm like, that's the literal definition of insanity, to like keep running into the same brick wall thinking the outcome's going to be different, right? So what all of the research literally at this point suggests is like, hey, we need to decriminalize. And that opens up the question of, so how are we going to govern or regulate the use of substances as a society, right? And that is part of the conversation going on in British Columbia. It's part of the conversation going on generally. It's usually the first question I get when people say, oh, you advocate for decrim? Well, what are we going to do about it? And I'm like, well, we're going to take a health-centered approach, but that requires an allocation of resources outside of the criminal justice system and into expanded harm reduction and health supports, right? So basically what we're trying to do is shift away from this justice-focused, criminalization model and instead turn it into a health concern and approach where we can meet people where they are and determine what services and supports they need. Most commonly, this is where we go to the other pillars, one of those major supports that folks need to heal and be well is housing, right? A sense of stability. It gives you a home base from which to access other services and supports. So, and when we're talking about sort of stabilizing, and I call it the stabilization model because these are the elements that we need to have in place if we want to stabilize this situation, which has been in a crisis and an emergency for over 10 years now. Like BC declared a public health emergency in 2016. Like that's... in my view, I'm like, we shouldn't be in a crisis for this long. Like a crisis should necessitate a change of approach, right? Because something you're doing, if there's a crisis occurring, something you're doing isn't working, right? And this is my like preventative policy side coming out. All to say that one of the greatest bridges then is getting into housing and those housing first models and ensuring that we're not saying, oh, you have to be abstinent before you get housing. You have to do X, Y, or Z before you get housing. It's just like, no, you get housing. And with that housing comes wraparound supports, right? So that we can, know where someone's at and, and then they can start building from that home base and into other services, into thinking about things other than where am I going to sleep tonight that's going to be safe? How am I going to access additional resources? You can't even get mail if you don't have housing, right? Like you can't, there's just so much that you cannot do without an address. And so having that home base gives a space for that support to actually happen. So we're going to decriminalize, move it to a health-focused model. Part of that is ensuring people have housing for that stability. Safer supply options are shown time and time again. I know that political leaders in this country are using this as a wedge issue to try and garner votes and scare the public into voting for them. The research shows otherwise. When you get into the numbers, when you get into the data, when we can provide people with their substance abuse, they are not as nearly as likely to die from a drug toxicity issue. And the big problem with the unregulated drug market is that people are dying from drug toxicity. And as is said over and over again, you cannot recover when you're dead. So what we need to do is ensure that people have access to safer supply. And what that also connects them to is a connection, a relationship to care providers, to people who are wanting to support them, to a sense that they matter, to a sense that they belong. And like, we understand that you're dependent on a substance. That's okay. We're not going to throw you out the door for that. We're welcoming you in. And we want to protect you from all of those contaminants that are going on in the unregulated market, and all the violence that's going on in that unregulated market. And we're going to connect you with supports. And one of those supports is, we're not going to threaten to send you into withdrawal every couple hours. We're going to say, here's what you need to feel not sick, so that, again, you can have that basis for thinking about additional things and additional supports. You're not spending your whole day on the grind trying to meet your trying to get your fix, right? You're now like, oh, I've got my fix. I've got my home base of a place to live. What do I want to do? Like, I can ask that question of like, do I want to talk to someone? Do I want to talk to a counselor? Do I want to call my family members? Do I want to have, do I want to go work at the drop-in? Do I want to do these things, other things in my life? And reminding people that those other things exist, shutting down some of that chaos that they've just been in that responsive survival mode. that offers an opportunity for healing. And that's where the final pillar part comes in. And that's access to voluntary treatment, right? When folks are not in constant chaos, they often will sort of say, hey, I have a sense of belonging. These things are going on. And maybe I do want to think about changing my relationship with substances. And they have the space to do that and the security to do that, because that's a really scary thing. Like if using a substance is the only thing that has made you feel human, has made you feel a sense of love, has made you feel well in the world, taking that away is terrifying. It's the one thing keeping you here.
Rand
right?
Teed says it best. You can't take something away without giving something back.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's really the core of it. And so, you know, when we're like, well, why aren't people opting to go to treatment? I'm like, because the idea of abstinence-only approaches is terrifying.
Yeah.
If your only support is your substance abuse.
Yeah.
So yes.
And they don't want to, get like something else that I'm noticing. It seems like it's moving towards, it's easier to get into treatment in handcuffs than it is to not.
And that is exactly, and that's concerning. And I'm
Yeah.
sure we'll get into the involuntary.
Oh, I can't wait. It's
the
like my
forced
favorite
treatment.
thing.
Absolutely. Right. And
You know, when
but-
we talk
yeah.
about treatment, the other thing, you know, the factor around that is accessible.
Yes.
You know, whatever the approach you go with, if you have to wait 6-8 weeks to get into treatment, a lot happens in that time. And, you know, as someone who many years ago went through that system, you know, today is the day.
Yes.
This hour
Yeah.
is the hour.
Yeah.
There is no, like, who knows what's going to happen. And lots of times it just sets people back. And then by the time their treatment date comes, they're not ready again.
Back in the sticks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, if we had these things in place, basically, and I call it the stabilization framework, you know, if everyone had was not criminalized, had access to safe, secure housing, was provided their substance of use through a regulated process, that alone is going to go a long way. And then we would start having those conversations around access to different treatment programs. Not every treatment program works for everyone. There's tons of different models, right? Folks might access a program and go, yeah, this doesn't really fit for me, or it's not addressing my needs. What's the other alternative? What are some of these different programs that might be available? What are the supports that I need to change my relationship with substances? But all without demanding that change. Like that housing is there, we're not criminalizing you, and we're ensuring that you have that safer supply. This drug toxicity crisis will be over. And I know that people are like, well, that's a big claim to make. I'm like, that is literally the root of this crisis, is the fact that our drug supply is completely toxic.
Yeah.
So, and people don't know what they're using. And that is usually a big part of the problem. This is sometimes why it annoys me when, you know, it's important to have drug alerts. Please don't get me wrong. But there's sort of this assumption like, oh, drug users don't know that there's things that could hurt them in the drugs. And I'm like, this nonsense attitude. People who use drugs have been educating health professionals and politicians for years about the harms of substance use.
It does kind of seem like trauma porn almost.
Yeah, it really
You know,
is.
It really is.
The alerts,
the
like,
trends.
Yeah.
And the thing that I hear most is, well, why are the dealers selling toxic drug supplies? Like, that's their buyer market. Like, that's ridiculous. And I'm like, I don't know.
Right.
Like, you know, drug trafficking systems is, you know, something I watch.
I've been out of that for a number of years now.
I'm not quite as, I know what the police tell me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know.
No, I mean,
And, you know, this idea, people deserve it.
oh,
And,
no.
you
Yeah,
know, those
yeah.
are the things I hear. And, you know, because we operate the managed alcohol program in the city for Kikanak Village, when I explain that to people, they tend to be a lot more understanding. And I think that's because of the view of alcohol in society. I get a lot of questions about, like, why can't they stop? And there's lots of reasons. We see lots of, you know, older folks accessing those services. It's not usually a young guy's game. But, you know, it's for health reasons and stability.
Well, and it's about like that it's been their best friend. It's been their first love.
Yeah.
You know, I heard someone, and I can't remember off the top of me, Elder Joanne Saddleback.
Oh.
Yeah, I was sitting in medicine with her, and that's one of the things she said. Oftentimes, the youth who end up lost in addiction are there because it was the first time they felt love.
Absolutely.
You take that first hit and it's just like,
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
man, I never felt that before.
Well, yeah, when opioids are released into your system, it's the closest chemical to what we feel when we feel love. Being loved, sharing love with another, that bond of love. The closest chemical simulation we have is opioids.
What most of us are looking for in life.
Yeah.
What most of us feel when we feel as though we've arrived
Yeah.
at life.
And then we're going to tell people, we're taking that away from you.
Yeah,
Go get well.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Stop taking that, and then
know,
we'll give you help for not taking
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if people could stop using substances, they wouldn't need your treatment.
Right?
program.
Yeah.
That's the whole point
That's
here.
the whole
Like,
point.
Yeah.
Well, and I use Maslow's hierarchy of needs
Yes.
when, because I train a lot of professionals. I did training for, I think there's like 30 or 40 ER nurses the other day. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs gives that visual, and then it starts to make sense, right? Like we need those basic needs. Then we start to feel safe. If we feel safe, then we can open up to, that idea of relationships and find that belonging. Then we have self-esteem because finally we feel like we're worth something. And then the idea of self-actualization. Nobody makes the best choices for themselves all the time.
No.
But, some days. But, it really is just that good, like, here it is. You cannot be successful if you don't have your basic needs, if you don't have connection. When I talk to people and they ask about treatment, you hear a lot about 12-step programs and, the pros, the cons, and the opinions of people, or people that access religion as, part of their recovery. And my response always is, one, nothing works for everyone. But the thing that those give is community. And, I've accessed 12-step programs for many years.
That's what saved me.
And that's the thing. Like you go and somebody gives a damn all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And, I just remember those first like few days after I'd gone before and stuff, but going and sitting in a meeting and this guy was next to me and I was like shaking and terrified. And he just kept saying, just hold on to your chair. Just keep that chair. And like till this day, he's like a father to me. But
I want to ask you, who was it? Because I bet you I know him.
You do know him. But that's the thing. Like all of a sudden, like people wanted to hug me. They were happy I showed up somewhere. And that's the same with churches, no matter our viewpoints on religion and what they do. And I have lots of opinions about things, is you're entering into a community. And it's settings where people care if you're there or not, and they're happy to see you. That's something when you've been using, you're rarely in a situation where people are happy you're somewhere. So, when we look at all of those things and what Barb is talking about is like, we need that framework. Like what you've put together is, the human side of things. It's not these, political warfare.
I agree with what you were saying about community, and that's what I noticed about those fellowships early on. There are some strong opinions. There's strong opinions everywhere. Like it's not limited to these rooms, but it did give me a community to go to that allowed me the opportunity to learn how to engage with a community. And I would say dumb things, and you were there, like I was, I would get all mad and pop off about this and about that. And like, it was ugly. Like but nobody ever said, don't come back. Like they'd always said, this, the cliche, keep coming back, and I think, the work, the program helped me a lot, but it was that I could keep coming back, keep getting more chances to learn how to engage with life, with other people.
I think like the steps are nice, but I don't think that's the magic to that situation.
Not for everyone.
It's, it was never something that, I did my steps, but it wasn't something that like changed things. It was that thing. And the only other person that had ever told me to keep coming back was my dealer. So like where else?
Just triggered. Hey, sitting in a meeting.
But, that's the thing.
Yeah.
You show up places and it's usually about manipulation or abuse and what can I take from you for my own selfishness, which in that state, absolutely, I've done it many times, but all of a sudden people like you and check on you. That's the other thing. Like,
and like, hey, come for coffee.
Yeah.
Hey,
like,
I'll buy you coffee.
hang out.
You want some fries?
Yeah.
Have some of my fries.
Do you need a ride?
Yeah.
All of those things.
Oh,
And,
Fuddruckers.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We used to go to the Thomas Cook on 33rd
Oh,
a
yeah,
lot.
yeah.
But all of those things you're talking about, like that's, it's that humanity piece. It's this is not a criminal issue.
Mm-hmm.
This is a person issue. And why are they there? I, have said a million times over the years that if we want to change the culture around this, we need healthcare, we need education, and we need housing. Those are the three pieces where the more you invest, the more return you get, and the less, criminal activity we see, better health outcomes and less reliance on emergency services in our hospital systems, that stability piece, that community piece. But, and I think we often leave out education, but, there is really great models of what happens within a society where you invest a lot of money. There's Nordic countries where, elementary school teachers need master's degrees. And, and education is free right through university, right? And it's that, if we can give them the best opportunities right from the start, and it's not to say like that there's not, issues and, exclusion of people, but, if we started right from the beginning, what would happen? And what if people could always have housing? What if healthcare didn't involve you having to go to a walk-in clinic because you can't find a family doctor? And, all of those things, then, the treatment side of things becomes a lot more affordable. And, if we invest in, proper programs and not 28-day programs.
Yeah.
But there is a simple answer to this. It's not complicated. It is in the, when we look at provincial budgets, it's actually really cheap, right? And, we can change the whole way our society is and give people opportunities they've never had.
I think I mean, we have a society that really champions the individual and this idea that people are working in isolation for all their success. And that's simply not borne out in research. It's not borne out by lived experience. It's, we live in communities, we live in a social environment. And when we often, in public health, we call that social determinants of health, right? And that's your education level and access. That's your ability to find and maintain employment. That's your social relationships. That's your access to health services. There's all these things. And what creates these things that we call social determinants is precisely how our society chooses to allocate resources and to whom they allocate those resources. And so, like, end of the day, we don't need to have social determinants of health. We could eliminate all of them. It's policy decisions that create those things, and it's policy decisions that can end those disparities. So, when folks say, oh, I want to live in a safer community, I want to increase the policing budget, I'm like, actually not policing in itself that's going to create that safer community. What you need is people who aren't desperate for resources in your community, and then folks aren't going to break into your car to steal those resources to do the things. Like there's a longer term solution here. Otherwise, that need's just going to keep growing. You're going to need more and more police to lock up more and more people to have literally no solution at the end of the day. Instead, if you feed people, house them, and look after those social needs, you're going to see a plummeting rate of break-ins and other kinds of like necessity-based crime. You're going to have safer neighborhoods.
Trauma won't be propagated.
Yes,
well,
absolutely.
and the police don't want the system to be like this either.
And they get that it's not working. Like, I'm like,
who
literally
would see it more clearly than them?
Absolutely.
There's very few officers I've ever met that was like, yes, I love hammering down on people and sticking them in jail. All of them were like,
I love tearing down tents.
Right?
Yeah,
like
right?
everybody's like, why can't we just do this different?
Yeah.
Right? And it's,
It must be one of those things where the system is now bogged down, like tearing down tents and issuing tickets for fires and whatever the case is, when they could be doing more high level things.
Absolutely.
Like prevention type things.
Well, and there's only so much control at a civic level.
Yeah.
We all go to lots of, community things. And the message is always the same. And, emergency services are like, yes, like, let's change everything above us so that we can do the job we're intended to. Let's go to heart attacks, be able to attend to fires, all of those resources. And, everybody knows. And, the problem with our political system is that rules are made by whoever's in power, right? Like, there's no consistency. And, it becomes this like conservative versus liberal conversation. I've had great work done with conservative governments and sat at tables and worked out new policies and all of those things. But that was the person that was there. This is, we have, for what democracy is, you can vote however you want. Whoever's sitting in those chairs gets to decide what rolls out of them. And that's, how do we get them to understand that they're going to save billions of dollars a year if we can just do these little things?
Before we get too far away from it, whenever I hear someone say housing first, there's a part of me that understands why people don't agree with that, because it's not that simple, right? No. Along with a lifetime of substance use, as we were talking about earlier, how it may have been their first love, it may have been their best support system, it may have been all of these things. So too, behavior comes with that is not productive to a healthier way to live. So when I say housing first, now what would the wraparound services that you mentioned, like, what would that look like? Like, what would security look like? What would
Yeah, I mean,
we have that.
Okay.
We have Kikanak Village here. We're one of the 3 partners that operate the program. So it's 43 apartments, so 43 tenants that live there. Every single one of them are our most high needs people in the city. Like, they were identified as you can't help them. They were done for. And, people with extremely violent pasts, people who, have come right from Sask Hospital, all of these things. And this model has been working there for the last 6 years or so. And it started with a building and this idea of, what if we put all the resources in one place? What would happen? Well, now that's grown to a second building and, already, some pressure to be like, when's the third? But that's what it is. It's people who have, been completely abandoned and told that there is no hope. Many of which, like, when we look at, many people know about what the lighthouse was like. These were people that weren't allowed in the lighthouse. They weren't allowed in shelters, like, nowhere. And on site, so part of the partnership is that we do all the on-site staffing. So we have staff there 24 hours a day, and there is nurses, there is case managers to all the community support, and the on-site staff then work with the case managers to manage things. The managed alcohol program is there. All their meds are there, and it's easy access to any resource they need. And it is incredibly successful. Having staff on site 24 hours a day, and I get this in all of our programs, like, oh, your staff must be so unsafe. We rarely deal with issues of, physical, danger to our staff, except for the youth homes where teenagers throw things and get very, very heightened. And so we're always looking at, staff safety. What does security look like there? But there is no security on site. There is the only security thing, and this is just to control, people from coming in the buildings, is you have to buzz a door to get in. And we have security cameras in the halls, right? Again, people wandering in the building.
It almost sounds like when you're meeting people's needs, they don't respond with violence.
Well, in sobriety, abstinence, not a requirement. Lots of people still use. Lots of people are drinking, but some aren't all the time, or their use shifts because it's not desperation anymore. And they start to piece those things together. And the other thing with it, it's not transitional housing. This is permanent housing for them. And when we look at a lot of these housing first models, they tend to be short-term solutions. This is their forever home. Their meals are prepared for them. They come and pick them up downstairs. They have a choice whether or not they take their meds. We do have amazing med adherence, though. And, you know, it's just those choices, those paths are open. And so, you know, it is working.
Yep.
And it is a model that can be expanded and applied to so many situations. And it's the permanent part that is super important, that they know this is their home forever.
No matter what?
No matter what. They have like...
So there has to be guardrails there.
There is, for sure. Like there is people who, you know, have not been successful.
Yeah.
And it's not very common, but that's usually individuals who have like extremely violent tendencies and are, you know, such a risk to everybody else in the building. You know, most of the people around there, like I said, people get angry. I get angry. In my fight, flight, or freeze, I'm a fight. And I'm a fight in a very large way. A very large way.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's the same thing. Stuff happens. They get angry. It's how they're willing, or how we can work with them to de-escalate that. And a lot of the time it's like, hey, want to go for a smoke? You know, we had a guy, an extremely violent guy who nobody, even when he was referred to us, there was like a meeting with everybody being like, do we think we can manage this on site? Turns out when he's escalating, if you mention Batman, he starts talking about Batman and it fixes the situation, right? So it's, you know, kind of having that understanding. The drop-in, we deal with so few violent issues, so few. We often get asked a lot up there about like staff being, you know, attacked. I had a group of student nurses once ask me how many times I've been stabbed there. Never. And like, you know, safety for everyone is like in knowing your environment, watching, you know, what's going on around you, you know, that sort of thing. But because it's that community piece, and it's the same with Kikanak Village, there is a community there, and you're with a bunch of other people, and you have the professional supports on site to help you meet your needs. And, you know, pathways look a lot different. We have one tenant, his mom came into my office one day because she had bought a t-shirt. And I didn't know that she was his mom at first. And she started talking, and then she just started bawling. And all like she was telling his story and their story, but she kept saying, it's the first time since he was a child that I just get to be a mom. I'm not worried that he's out on the streets. I'm not having to rescue him from dangerous places. I'm not having to get police to find him because he's missing. She's like, I went over there on Sunday and we went to McDonald's. I took him home. I know he's cared for. I know he's well. I get to just be his mom. And, you know, that's the things that we don't always consider. There's ripple effects to things, but, and like Barb said, we have tons of research showing this model is successful. It's been successful in lots of places. And that's where housing first comes in, is that it's not just about sticking someone in an apartment and leaving them. It is, here is your basic needs. Now we're going to provide all of these services to you. We're coming to you. You don't have to go to 8 clinics to get your things. You don't have to, you know, if you're having medical issues or, you know, something's going wrong, you know, either buzz downstairs, walk down the stairs and said, hey, I need to be checked out. Okay, we'll call the community paramedics to come.
Well, that's kind of what your program did for Donna.
Yeah.
You know, she wasn't in a facility, like your village that you're talking about there, but, you know, helped her find a place, and workers showed up, and that was her support system. And she was allowed to stick her nose out into the world whenever she was ready, you know, because we know Donna's story, you know, how dangerous things were for her. So having the ability to just like hunker down and find center. And look at her today.
Yeah. One of the days, like, I cry at work, but like probably the day I cried the most was the day that Donna called her parents and we helped her do that. And that was so terrifying for her. And I just remember, just making that like, Kate, we're going to sit here and we're going to help you call. If you need us to start the conversation, we will. But, that's the thing about like, that's where she was at. And we're going to start there. And, for family support, I worked in that department for years. Going to the food bank is where I've done the best work I've ever done because it's something that seems so simple. It's non-evasive. And, for a long time, lots of people are like, I'm only going to the food bank every 2 weeks. That's all I need you for. And then, start the simple conversations. And then one day you're like, hey, how's it going? And all of this stuff comes out. And then it starts a conversation about, okay, you said this. Here's what we can do, if you want to do any of those things, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And it is that, just human to human approach. Like the training I do for professionals, and I say this in the training, it's one of my first slides, is that it is no one at work is Kayla's Don't Be a Dick training, because that's all I talk about when people are like, how are you guys so safe? Why isn't this stuff happening? We're just nice people. Like there's no magical training.
Haven't you met us?
Our staff, they go through very standard trainings of things, but we're looking for a specific person who is just a really nice person that, lives with no judgment, and that's part of who they are. And so you put all those pieces together and there's choice. That's the thing, is when you put all those things together, then people feel like they have a choice, and whatever that may be, they know that there is some safety in that.
Absolutely. Well, and I think it's really, how do I put it? I think it's far easier for many systems or programs to say, oh, well, that individual is the problem. And they should be responding to our program in a different way, rather than saying, oh, if we're having a bunch of violent reactions, if people are getting stabbed, maybe we're not providing the right context of support for that person or for these folks. What can we do differently in our approach? And put the work on the folks who are supporting rather than on the folks who are desperate and needing that care. Additionally, like, these are, I hate the term the hardest to reach, I know, right? The health literature. But if it's working here, then surely if we had this sort of intervention at an earlier point in people's trajectory, we're going to see even better health outcomes. And maybe it will prevent that crisis point from forming. I'm always encouraging, at least students and others that I talk to, I'm like, I think this rock bottom narrative has been a serious detriment where no, you can change your relationship with a substance of use at any point in your trajectory of use. Anytime you want to try and change
you're
that,
like,
it's okay.
Time.
Like you're allowed, you don't have to wait. And I often, but sometimes folks are like, oh, I don't have a problem. I still have a house. And I'm like, cool. So but maybe we don't have to wait until you've lost that housing or until you have no family members willing to speak with you anymore. And this kind of stuff. Like maybe we can say, oh, you know what? Maybe I don't like the trajectory I see myself on. So what are the resources and supports that I can access to make this change earlier on, in a sense? And prevention is always the cheapest. It's the best, most cost-effective solution ever is prevention, right?
So stop glamorizing rock bottom then.
Yes, 100%.
That's what I'm hearing.
And and reaching out early and often, when we need it. And I know, we all sit here and say, oh, just reach out for help and talk to people and this
sort
of
of
stuff.
It's such a blanket statement.
But it's like, that's fine for everyone else, but not
now.
It's like you don't understand.
It's
that
scary.
Vulnerability sucks.
Everybody
right?
that I know hates me right now. So that must mean everybody hates me. You know what I mean?
Well, and I was at our girls' home yesterday, and we have a girl who's, been going through a lot and causing, some concerns in the house, that sort of thing. As a teenager with all of this trauma, and so she's coming from a lifetime of no belonging, and, she's doing all of these things. So then, there's a conversation around, is this the best place for her to be? What is the impact to everybody else is? What do we do? And my first thing, because the staff are in the middle of it and they're a little frustrated because she, threw something or yelled at people or, went after a girl or whatever it is. And, my first question is, what is happening that we haven't been able to get her to cross that line yet? Like, is there something where, we could look at the situation and say, I think, these indicators have said, like, she's not ready. There's something there that's blocking that. That's where her safety is her being the most volatile at the time. And so, trying to start the conversation there. It doesn't mean that, she's in the right place and we're the right house for her or whatever it is, but let's start there. Why is she at this point? And then is there something we can do to help her? Look at our own side of things. What have we been doing that isn't good for her? And, that's where the conversation doesn't usually start there. Is like, why are they in this place where we haven't made them feel safe?
This episode of the Speakeasy Podcast is brought to you by Surge SK, Saskatchewan's Substance Use Information Hub. Surge SK connects service providers, researchers, people with lived and living experience, and policymakers to strengthen collaboration and enhance care across the province. Together, they're working to reduce substance-related harms and build healthier communities for everyone in Saskatchewan. To learn more, find their link in the show notes. Quick pause here. If you're finding value in this conversation, head over to speakeasynetwork.ca. Every episode is paired with a blog post that dives deeper into the issues we cover, offering extra context and connects you with tools and voices driving real change in Saskatchewan. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leave a rating or review, drop a comment wherever you're listening. All this helps more people find these conversations and helps keep momentum going. Now, back to the episode. So, Kayla, the province is moving back towards punitive drug policies. Cuts to harm reduction supplies, weaponizing paraphernalia, and so on. What are you seeing on the ground as a result?
There's a lot of fear when we look at the changes to the Safety Act around needles and pipes and fentanyl and meth being weapons. And, I've talked to our police chief at length about this, and it is up to each, jurisdiction whether they adopt these laws as, they've been put forward. But, the police don't see the value in it. That's more strain on our justice system. And, like Barb said, we're already losing the war on drugs. The thing that, we get stuck in is that if we can't fix it the way we want, then we punish. And, again, it's that mind shift of like, they have to do what I want when I want it. Which, if you're on the other side of that conversation, if somebody asks me, where I'm at in my life, came at me and was like, you have to do this.
Or else.
I'm not, like, that's not helpful no matter what.
Also known as coercion.
Right.
So in research, we would call that coercion. If I demand people do things in the way that I say when I say, that's not received well.
Well, in this, punitive approach, that's where criminalization of substances started. It was, way back in history when
1908,
the Opium Act, where that was not out of like, civic, benefit in any way. It was because they wanted something to throw to, imprison and deport Asian people that had been brought here to build railroads. Yep. And, we don't talk a lot about the Asian encampments that existed. And that was the start of criminalization. It's it's control by a certain population and that enforcement. It's never worked, like ever in our history. And it is costing tons of money. And the other scary thing when we look at these laws, and it was one of the things that the police chief and I talked about last week, is you can only control so much when you're in charge of something. I have 150, 160 staff. I hope they're all doing what they need to do at the front. It's the same with police. You can only, hope, they're following what should happen. But it's down to that individual police officer, how those things are enforced. So, in a perfect world, we can say, no, they're not going to randomly stop someone. But if an officer does, and they have, needles on them from their own use, they can now be charged with weapons. Where, we've seen with policing before is that, the decision is like, I come into a situation where there are larger charges, whether it be like violence or theft or whatever, and then I find these things on people. Is it worth adding those charges? And we see that a lot with, police going into situations and there's drugs in there. Is it, possession with intent or not? Does charging them with possession even do anything with these larger charges? And so, we have to consider that too, is that what is each officer going to make this look like? And, the wish is that, they all recognize why this isn't a good thing. But like I said, like that means that everybody is at risk. And like I carry a naloxone kit everywhere I go. My kids have access to naloxone. Yep. If I, get searched one day and my bag...
Oh my God, there's needles in naloxone kits.
Well, I have 3 in my backpack every day.
Yep.
I'd never even...
Yeah.
They wouldn't, would they?
Well, I would
but they
hope.
could.
Well, and
they
that's
could,
the thing.
And I think that's
they
the
could.
concern.
And this is where, like,
this is
where that judgment comes in. Like, I'm a middle-aged white woman.
No.
Yeah.
The likelihood that they would search my bag in the first place is pretty low.
Well, but even
if I did something and they did, I'm more likely to get leniency.
Yeah.
Because I'm... Yeah. We have so much racism built into our systems.
Yeah.
But when I look at even, our folks in the drop-in that work in the drop-in who are, actively living these things, but they are employed, who do carry, naloxone kits and stuff. We have people who are in sobriety, but they carry these things. And some
by
of them...
the wagon full.
Yeah, by the wagon full.
My wagon full of weapons going in the hood. Right? Did you see that?
Well, and concerning. I know lots of people who carry, extra syringes on them so that, if they're out in community, they can, give them to people so they're not reusing their supplies or sharing them. So, the majority of the people are Indigenous. A large number of them are male. They often have... rap sheets that are very, very, very long.
Robust.
Yeah. Robust is a good word. So, if they get stopped, they're more likely to get searched.
Yeah.
And then what does that look like?
That gives the officers more discretion.
Yeah.
Well, and I've heard folks talk about only applying this in a behavior-based kind of way. And I'm like, but if you were going to do that, you could have already done that without this change to the act. Like, if I'm running down the street with a syringe in my hand, threatening people with it, then I'm already using it as a weapon and could be charged as such. So
that's the thing.
So this is why I'm like, this is bogus politicking
redundant.
To make it look like
we're doing something.
Yes, when it's like,
oh my God, you are so right. You guys are just blowing my mind this morning. Like, what if somebody has some pills and doesn't even have syringes for using, but they have the pills and they're going to use the pills, but they also have a naloxone kit to protect themselves and help their friend or reduce costs to the healthcare system.
Totally.
The officers could use the syringes in that kit.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing, when we look at all of this, our culture around alcohol. Alcohol is the most dangerous substance that exists.
By a very large margin.
One of the things I say and try and explain to things, a lot of my conservative family especially, is that when you're using a lot of substances to the point that you're seeing, extreme circumstances starting to surround that person, you are in addiction. And the chance of you, unless you're using psychedelics, sometimes those change things pretty quickly. But the likelihood that, and we see it all the time, like very successful people doing lines of coke on a Saturday, but they're going to work and the influence over their life is different. We don't talk about that with alcohol. And alcohol, when you're under the influence, and any substance, but this idea, like you can go drinking every weekend, drinking and driving is a huge issue in our society. But it's somehow like, people aren't punished. I don't want to call out our SAS party, but when you look at DUIs and what happens there,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's like, oh, that's not that bad.
Yeah.
Well, it actually is.
Yeah.
And
In fact, I would argue that it's more reckless than
Yeah.
a lot of things that are going on the street. You know,
Yeah.
you're operating a vehicle.
You know,
That's it's not just about you.
and
Yes,
it's
like,
not,
who's a greater threat to the
you're
community.
Yeah,
not,
yeah.
Like,
you know, when we look at things, any person who drinks alcohol is at more risk, no matter what, you know, if they're normal people, to do something that has extreme harm. Where, you know, with other substances where we tend to see those things, and there's always, you know, one-offs of whatever happens, but you know, when we see a lot of these circumstances around violence and damage and those sort of things, that's people who are using a lot of substances. It's not recreational.
Yeah.
Recreational alcohol use can cause harm in one night.
Well, I mean, look at let's go to the let's have a drink and go. Oh, let's go to the VLT now. And
Yeah.
now you're broke.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I remember having a conversation with former Chief Cooper, and he said, like, you want to know where the alcohol is? Follow the violence. Like, you can see
Yeah.
it on the map.
Yeah.
Where's the bar? There's more shit
Yeah.
going on there. You know.
Well, and it's easier, like, to get in fights, to get in your car and drive and cause, you know, somebody's life.
Yeah.
You
Several
know,
people's
severe,
lives.
You know, when we look at interpartner violence, alcohol's often a factor in those circumstances. When we look at, you know, risk to children, you know, that's all, you know, what we would deem recreational users, that it's no problem. And, you know, but it's that culture idea around alcohol. If we decriminalize drugs and, you know, put them at the same, like, understanding of alcohol, that shifts things. I do strongly believe that punitive measures for DUIs need to be a lot more aggressive. But, you know, this culture around it, you know, it's a very different thing. I feel like there is, you know, this trendy movement right now to be sober, or like California sober. And now, like, as somebody who is sober, I'm super happy to see mocktails on menus at restaurants, so I don't have to drink Sprite all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
You're
I love a
paying-
good Virgin Caesar.
Right? Like,
Oh, love it.
you know, I had some sort of like coconut magic thing, you know, a few weeks ago. I don't know what was in
I'm
that
drunk on flavor.
right? Like, it was insane. But, you know, there is a bit of a shift, but it's like this trendy health thing. And then, you know, when that loses, you know, the trend, then we go back to recreational use. But we need to look at all substances through kind of this fluidity of, like, there is a difference between, you know, somebody who's, you know, used drugs one time and gets caught with stuff on them, or, you know, looks guilty on the street, gets searched, and there's syringes and a naloxone kit.
Has that happened?
No, not yet. Like, not that I know of.
Yeah.
Our police force, you know, at this point hasn't adopted those laws.
Oh, okay.
And so it hasn't been decided by the city. And I, you know, would hope that they don't see the usefulness. There have been already places that have said no. And so, you know, the criminalization, and it's not helpful.
No.
Like, forced treatment, what the hell? And I do know people who have gone through, you know, the court system and been, you know, court ordered treatment, and it's been successful. Again, I'm sounding really, you know, racially driven right now. They're all white, you know. That's everybody I've ever met in the program that went through that. They're all white. That doesn't mean their life was great, but, you know, it does seem to be like that's an option. You know, but just because it works sometimes, it's not
the
thing.
only thing.
No. And, you know, for all of them, you know, they were more at a point of like, this isn't good anymore. And, you know, so you can't, like, this blanket approach to everyone.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of the arguments I use is that, you know, if one of my folks that lives in an encampment is arrested and under the influence and is court ordered to go to treatment and then released back to homelessness, what problem are you solving there? And then why, you know, the potential for taking up beds for people who are really trying to get in there at the time. So where do we deal with that. You know, the most successful treatment models I've ever looked at are long-term treatment, and you know, has seen, you know, successful outcomes from programs where you're like inpatient for a certain time, and then you're in a sober living environment for a certain amount of time. And, you know, then you are, you know, supported to gain skills or whatever that is. And then, you know, sometimes from there, it's transitioning to community-based addiction support. So there's a whole continuum there. Well, there's where success is. So, you know, if we want to look at effective treatment models, then fund treatment that actually will help people. I know, unfortunately, too many people who committed suicide leaving treatment. And, you know, that, you know, I've walked out those doors back into society, and now what do I do? And especially with shorter timelines of treatment, because you've opened this like gaping wound of trauma and pain and all of those things. You can't close it back up easily. And so you're discharged back into the world realistically with very little follow-up. Maybe this enforcement piece would look different if it meant it was like a long-term solution. And, you know, if there was choice built into
opportunities to succeed.
Like, and training and job skills and therapy and like all of those things, maybe it would work differently. I'm never like, I don't know if I'd ever agree with forced anything in society, but you know, if you're going to push somebody and say, this is what we need, then pick a model that may actually work for some people.
So much of what you've said, Kayla, I'm just like, how do I put it? The regulation of alcohol has reduced like immediate acute harms, like death from drinking alcohol or blindness and these sorts of things that happened when we had prohibition. But are we regulating it well at this point? Are we addressing all those social harms? No. The alcohol industry has like a huge influence, too big an influence. You know, when I see that like Great West Brewing billboard downtown, like every night's a good time, and I'm like, oh no, you know, we would never advertise tobacco like that anymore. And I feel like we're at a stage with alcohol where it's where we were with tobacco in the 70s. People do not see the harms that it's causing. They're not aware of the harms. It is a known carcinogen.
Hotboxed in the vehicle with your parents
while
they're chain smoking.
Absolutely. You know, so many road trips.
That's why my brain doesn't work all the time.
Right? Like,
a new reason to be mad at our parents.
These harms there we go. Right? These harms are no good. We're finally seeing those connections between alcohol use and cancer. And like, there's just, I feel like 20 years from now, hopefully not 20, but like definitely by 20 years from now, I think we're going to see huge regulatory changes in terms of the ability to advertise alcohol, you know, that it's going to look a lot more like tobacco. There should be warning labels on every bottle, but the lobby, like the alcohol lobby, industry lobby, pushed back hard on that. They do not want this causes cancer because shockingly, it might affect their sales, you know? So much like we've been fighting with the tobacco industry for a really long time to get public health messaging out there, I think we're going to be in that fight with alcohol for a long time. But when we are simultaneously saying, hey, let's have a safer supply approach with other substances because criminalization in an unregulated market is harmful, yes. And we can bring in those regulations. Like we can have that conversation about regulation to protect population health, to ensure that people are aware of what's going on. Where do we want to distribute this? Like all these really complex conversations need to happen, but they can't happen when we're still just criminalizing things, when we're calling things weapons that are not weapons. I mean, you know, really, I could take a kitchen spoon and it could become a weapon in the right context, right? So, so just trying to regulate objects, just like trying to regulate drugs, hasn't worked in a sense. Like you can't criminalize cocaine; you're criminalizing people who use cocaine. I say when you mentioned that history too, if folks want to learn more, Canadian Drug Policy Coalition has a great summary on their website, freely available. It goes through the history of Canada's drug prohibition and how we did that. And I think it's important because when people read that, they're like, what do you mean this isn't based in any kind of evidence and is actually like the racist rantings of many leaders in our past?
So, Barb, you've said forced treatment should be avoided. I think everyone has said that in this room. Where do you land on the ethics and limits of involuntary care? Because personally, as I believe it, like I have seen Jailhouse Genesis. You know, our good friend Chantel Huell. I mean, she was relieved when the cops kicked the door in, you know. And I've heard that said so many times. I was just done.
Yeah.
You know, and I've also heard other people say like, lock me in a cage, or like, you
Yeah.
know, lock me in a room and don't let me, you know, that they want it, but it's so I see a place for it on our spectrum of care.
Yeah.
Like I certainly do. But there's a lot of things around that. So Barb, tell me a little bit about what you think about the ethics of it all.
Yeah, well, I mean, at the end of the day, we have a Mental Health Services Act in Saskatchewan, which does allow when someone is a threat to themselves or others, for them to be taken for assessment and for medical professionals to potentially hold them for a period of time to ensure their wellness, health, and safety, right? That exists. That is already there.
Well, I went to treatment with a guy who was mandated to be there 9 years ago.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So like these mechanisms do exist already when they're needed, but they're used very sparingly. They're also very clearly laid out, like you can have this period of time, you need to have these advocates in place. Like there's time limits, there's rules and regulations around it. There are human rights focused approaches to doing this kind of thing. And what we've seen in the rhetoric around forced treatment or involuntary treatment, as we're calling it, or compassionate care if you're in Alberta.
Yeah.
Compassionate intervention.
Yes, right?
Yes.
It's concerning. I don't know. I once had a teacher tell me that whenever a government calls something compassionate or caring or is about patriotism or so on, they're actually doing the opposite, like a lot of the time. So to watch out for that. So in many ways, the Compassionate Intervention Act, as I've read it, is anything but compassionate for the people that it will affect and those it will detain. It's so what am I trying to say? There are already mechanisms in place when someone is a threat to themselves or others due to their substance use and or mental health concerns, right? Like there are mechanisms and ways to do that. What British Columbia did, on the heels of, because this conversation has been happening nationally around sort of, is there a place for involuntary admission or treatment for people who use substances? And that's been a conversation going on. But what BC did was basically one of their medical health officers, and I'm forgetting his name now, which is very convenient. But what they did was they reiterated to care providers, hey, here's the way you can use the BC Mental Health Services Act if this is applicable for substance use. And they reiterated those guidelines to tell care providers, like, hey, it's not that you have an absence of tools. It's that there's criteria that are established. You should know them as a care provider. And this is when it applies and when it doesn't.
Yeah.
Great. Solved. Now they're not going to be facing charter challenges, legal court battles, confusion that's going on. So I think it was a better approach than what Alberta's done in passing this Compassionate Intervention Act. Because if you read that act, there's really no parameters attached. They're going to be in court battles for the next 50 years trying to sort out how this relates to the Youth Criminal Justice Act, how it relates to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, what the time limit should be, who sits on their commissions. Like it's, in my view, a disaster of policy and should be repealed immediately. And instead they should follow what BC is doing. If we're even going to visit this sort of conversation, in my view, you're going to have far more impact if you make access to voluntary services more available. We keep hearing about these 6-week, 8-week, many months waits to get into facilities for voluntary care. Let's fix that before we start mandating people into places. Like
even if you mandate them, where are they going?
This is the other question, right? So like there doesn't seem to be any common sense being applied in a lot of this conversation. I think it's a vote grab. That's my, we want to look like we're doing something. So we haven't thought through any of the actual rollout and what this will mean for people's lives. And it's basically the reason we're even having this conversation is because our systems have been so under-resourced for so long now that we don't see other options. That we're like, oh my God, we see the harms in our streets. We see people suffering. And instead of saying, oh my God, this must mean a massive system shortage of care, we should demand more from our governments to fund health services and early intervention supports, we say, oh, well, let's just do a street sweep with police officers and throw them into involuntary treatment. No, it's not. Our desire, even having this conversation to me is a symptom of the failures that we've had in policymaking over the last 10 years. When I hear people complain like, oh, there's people hanging out outside PHR. And I'm like, yeah, because PHR is full. because they're full. It's actually
300 people full.
right. It actually means we need more PHRs to meet the need of the service demand. And instead of doing that, we're like, oh, we should just throw people in jail. Like simplistic solutions lead to simplistic outcomes. Right?
I had a nurse tell me a little bit ago that she intentionally parks in front of our building because she feels her car is safer there than closer to St. Paul's. And I was like,
yes, right? But yeah, and I often hear people saying, oh, I don't want to see those people in the street. We should shut down PHR. Do you know how many more people you can see in the street if you shut down PHR? So this idea that if we get rid of a service, that the need for that service is going to go away, completely wrong. It's kind of like, but I mean, we've seen that kind of leadership from government, from leaders in our federal politics here and south of the border, where they're like, no, there's no pandemic because we're not collecting any data about it. If we don't collect the data, it doesn't exist. Well, no, that's the wrong way to address these problems, to just ignore them and pretend they don't exist or that they evaporate when you stop paying attention to them. It's not how it works. You know, one of the developmental stages in as an individual in the world is when you realize that when a ball rolls behind the couch, it still exists even though you can't see it. That's like a toddler development stage, and I would love it if our policymakers could get there.
I'm going through the same thing with my dog.
Right
now.
This is right.
The other part of this conversation that we never have is the long-term consequences for the individual. So this December, it'll be 22 years that I've been sober. And after all of that time and everything I've done, my life insurance is more expensive than my husband's because I was involuntarily committed to the psychiatric ward, and I have a history of addictions on my medical information. Now, when I was committed to the psych ward, it was out of my parents' desperation. Did it have an effect on the choices I made? I left that day and went right to my dealer's house. Like I had somebody like just drop me off there, and I was high again. And so, you know, it didn't have the effect. I didn't get like magically diagnosed. All I did was like sit in bed, do crosswords and eat. Like there was no real care there. But, you know, 22 years later, I have to pay more on my life insurance. And, you know, we don't think about, you know, when we are making these laws and putting these things in place, those are going to follow somebody for years. It's the same as like a criminal record, right? Like that follows you forever.
I hear this story of sort of desperate parents. I get it.
Desperation.
Of course, you want to protect your kids, like by whatever means necessary. And if they hate you forever, so be it. Like I see that desperation. And I just wish there were more options available for families, for people to say, hey, you know, this is another way you can intervene that's more compassionate, that's not going to follow you for life, that we would have those services and supports available for people. You know, and I think we could do that if we weren't blowing the budget on nonsensical approaches that are not evidence-based. So there's not enough evidence, quote unquote, around, you know, where we've had good controls around this is involuntary care and its outcomes, and this is how the treatments were delivered and all this sort of stuff, and this is voluntary care and da-da-da. And so we just haven't had enough comparative sort of studies. There was a big literature review of all these studies that had some kind of, or a way to compare, right? And they leveraged this out. And basically, what they found was 22 articles that had decent comparable factors. And basically 10 of 22 articles said this didn't benefit anyone. 7 of the articles said there were some benefits, but the biggest benefit was retention in treatment. And I'm like, oh, shockingly, when people can't leave treatment, you retain them more. Wow, what a finding. So that was the biggest outcome. And that was only 7 of the articles. And the others saw that it caused harm to people. So from what we know right now, which is not enough, this is not going to lead to the outcomes that people are hoping for. It will further traumatize people. It will alienate them from the healthcare system. That's very clear from research in many contexts. And we don't know enough to be making the claims about this approach that are being made. And I always encourage folks to follow the money whenever possible. Who's getting paid out of this?
You know, data, when we look at outcomes, once they walk out their door, we have no idea how successful it is. None. So you can't say, you know, were they, you know, sober and clean for 3 months, for 5 days, you know, what does that look like?
And what is the benchmark of success?
Well, and
Like,
that's
what
the
is
thing.
that?
Like,
Is abstinence the benchmark?
yeah.
And that's,
Well, and
right? How
you
do we
know,
measure this, right?
right? And, you know, the, you know, best data I can find, and Barb probably has seen way better numbers than these, is that, you know, treatment is like 4% effective. But we
Treatment
don't,
as we know it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so we don't, but we can't follow people. I know like there's outpatient treatment programs because they have, you know, longer term support things, like they can track people a little bit longer. I've seen some models where they, you know, do check-ins following, and for them it's mostly a data reason, but you know, you can follow the progress of somebody. And then, yeah, so what does that look like? And then the other piece is, yeah, how do we define what sobriety is? Like, I know one of our kids, that path started because he wanted to play football and then realized he can't be high all the time and play football. Then he wanted to wrestle, and the coach was like, well, you can't be doing drugs. And so he was like, okay. And we like offered all of these options. And he was like, no, like, I think just going to wrestling is going to help. It did. So, you know, these forced approaches,
Yeah.
is there actually success in people's life?
Right.
No, it looks good on the news and in a briefing to say we're doing it this way. I don't think it will actually cause, you know, much change, because like you said, you know, we have people like Chantal where that did work. And I know, you know, lots of people that I've met in the program where, you know, that forced by a judge thing did work. I've also seen a million people bring those probation cards and like come in at the beginning and be like, can you just sign this now? Because I'm not staying. And like, you know, show up. And once that card doesn't need to be signed anymore, you never see them again.
Yeah.
So
I'm also curious if you had an option to exit, like if there was something equivalent to the police kicking your door down. You know what I mean? But it was like self-initiated, where you're like, I'm so done with this, and there's somewhere I can go and say,
Yeah.
I'm fucking done with this.
yeah.
How many people, you know, might come in actually voluntarily? Like, we assume they won't, but
Yeah.
but seeking that relief, a lot of it, you know, I mean, when I'm getting calls from people, you know, I'm a researcher at the university, and I get emails and calls from people saying, hey, how do I access X, Y, and Z? I don't know where to go. Who do I talk to? When a researcher is like who you can find before the health system, like something's very broken.
Like, you need to reach out to your PhD friend to figure this out.
Totally. And I'm really grateful that they do reach out, that there's a safety there. Like, I'm happy. So please reach out if you need support in accessing things. Like, I will connect you with the people I know, but it shouldn't be that. It shouldn't be that. There should be like that. I mean, God, it's taken years to even try and set up a centralized intake line. And like, I see sort of good intentions, but not a lot of knowledge behind those good intentions. You know, do I think the government's sitting there being like, how can we be more evil today? Maybe some of them. But I don't think that's truly the motivation. A lot of times bad policy is the result of great intentions with no information. And I think, you know, really, do we have a lot of info about recovery and what that looks like? No. Like CCSA, the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction, their life and recovery report that came out in 2017 was the first ever national survey of what it looked like to be in recovery. And by and large, what do people say? It's an improvement in my quality of life.
Yeah.
And all the care providers went, what do you mean? It's not abstinence first, you know? Like, and it turns out the first thing people value is an improvement in quality of life, which meant improved relationships with family, improved living conditions generally. And their physical health was way down that list. And abstinence was mentioned by some as part of their recovery, or what they believed was part of that improvement in quality of life. But it wasn't a priority. The priority was improved quality of life. A lot of our treatment studies will come in with a new intervention, and it'll be this intervention versus treatment as usual. And they call it TAU, like treatment as usual. But what treatment as usual means can vary from center to center, from program to program. So even when we have a treatment as usual comparison, it might not be you might be comparing apples and oranges, which you can do sort of, but you need really good controls to take account of the citrus variation.
So let's talk about youth. Our education system wasn't built for the kinds of challenges kids are facing today. How is it failing them when it comes to poverty reduction, substance use, and mental health?
You know, we've always been asked a lot about sex education because we do a lot of work around HIV and Hep C. And that used to be like the primary request from schools around what we can do. Now we have schools asking us to come in and talk about drugs. The alternative school programs, like one of them comes to the SCS every year, and they interview people and staff. And it's, a really great learning opportunity. One of the other ones, the kids have a choice on projects they can do. And, often they, have picked things related to us and then asked us to go in and do naloxone training. One of the things that has shifted that I find quite interesting is that lots of high school students who have options usually around health sciences we're one of the choices they have to do their project on. Okay. What I talk about is, what can relate to them, when we talk about peer pressure. And if you are in a situation where you decide to use, what can you do? Or what does a safety plan look like? What happens if you're at a party and a friend of yours is incredibly intoxicated and you're worried? What does consent look like? Those type of things. Because that's, especially at that age, that's the uncomfortable conversations that a lot of people don't have. From those conversations, I've had, quite a few, follow-ups with teachers who said, after you guys left or a week later, somebody came to talk to me about their mom or dad or a situation they're in, or this had happened to a friend or themselves and what that looks like. And so it opens dialogue. We have more students wanting naloxone training. With the shift in some of the school policies, I think it's become scarier for teachers about where that line is. And they, want kids to learn these things. They don't want to follow like the pronoun policies that are put in place and jeopardize their students. And so many of them, are jeopardizing a lot of their career to, not follow these things. And so, sometimes, it's kind of like I haven't told anyone you're coming in. Back in our day going to school, like it was a scare tactic. And then there was always like some person that came in and talked in an assembly to scare the living bejesus out of you, then you're not going to do it. Well, clearly I missed the message. Yep. But
I did too.
Yeah, all of us missed that message.
But I do know the drug kit, like that stuff looked bunk. That's what I know years later looking back is like, oh, your demonstration of what cannabis looked like was like totally wrong. And
which is how people, I'm pretty sure, trick so many people selling oregano.
Yeah.
Absolutely, right? Yeah. It's great for the oregano industry. But,
well, and even recently, like we had drugs brought in by a mom who she had found in her kids' stuff. And it was brought to the SCS, and we do get, calls from the public, like, what does it look like to test this stuff? So she brought it in, and the paramedics looked at it and they're like, this doesn't look like anything I've seen. And, they were looking at it and they're like, hey, well, we'll test it. And then, they were, kind of examining things.
Examining it.
Yeah, examining it.
Yeah.
And someone was like, that's cat food. Yeah. So she was like, yeah, my kid got ripped off. Clearly.
Yeah.
Right? But, we don't talk to kids. We're afraid to let them know too much. When you look at the whole like festival scene, there's a lot of drugs there, right? Like a lot of drugs, a lot of very young people, there is, harm reduction tent and a first aid tent, and, they try and educate people. But like, if you don't know any basics of anything and you go into a situation, we see this, the whole rave thing around ecstasy, right? You become incredibly dehydrated, and then that's what's causing harm. Yeah. And nobody knows, we need to give them water, right? So that education piece around youth is hugely missing. And then, the other side of it with our youth that are dealing with all of those other things who are, heavily using, we don't have supports for them. And, the solution is always like secure detox. Oh, we'll just send them to secure detox. Well,
make them more vulnerable to poisoning
helping there? And, it almost... it's something where, we're, blindfolded to a lot of things, but anything around youth, we're like, nope, that doesn't exist. And now we have a whole, culture of kids who nobody has planned anything for.
Yeah.
And that's probably the hardest thing about working with youth is that your hands are so tied to find services. And, you know, the reaction most of the time with kids who are using substances, secure detox. We get a lot of questions about, like, why do you let kids come home when they're under the influence? Well, because somebody should be taking care of them. You know, if somebody is heavily intoxicated and comes home, you know, they usually want food and then, you know, go to bed, and then the staff are checking on them constantly and making sure things are going well. And, you know, that's, again, you know, oh, we should just push them out onto the streets and they'll figure it out someday. Yeah. They don't have all their brains.
I know, they're still growing and developing.
Right?
Like, there's, yes, 100%.
And then, like, we have trauma, which changes your brain.
Yep.
We have substance use, which changes your brain. And we have puberty. You know, if any population needs the most attention, it's that.
It seems like a lot of the sort of policies around the education policies are about adults preserving their perception of youthful innocence more than responding to the needs of youth. And over we see in like prevention literature and things like that, like a by youth for youth approach. I was so glad when you mentioned your son came in to do the training, right? Like there's, I like to think I'm still young and hip and all those things, but I have no idea what it's like to be 15 today. You know, yes, I was once 15, but that was a long time ago now. That was like before the internet.
That was before Skibidi Toilet.
Right? Right? Like lots of things have changed in that time. So so just like we would consult with any other group of people before going in with an intervention or initiating an idea, we need to consult with young people. What is relevant? What are you seeing? What matters to you? And then co-develop that and have youth leading this education. No, ignorance is not protective. You know, it's not protective. And we've also seen in the literature that, like, when it comes to the harms of, say witnessing a drug poisoning, when you have the skills to respond and you know that you've done everything you could possibly do, whatever the outcome of that event, you're going to be able to move forward in a different way than if you're stuck on that what if. What if I'd had naloxone training? What if I knew to call emergency services? Would that person's outcome have been the same? And when you get stuck in that what if loop, the trauma just resonates in your life. And that's true for adults and young people.
What would it look like to have a youth training team and have youth who understand all of these things and can go in and talk to grade 7 and 8s? About these things and, you know, and not just sending them in alone because the questions go all over the place, but seeing somebody very relatable, you know, talk about these things. But I think it would be cool to have options for kids who have all the information and who are supported to be able to share it, because it's one thing to know it, it's another thing to share it, who, you know, are supported by, you know, like for us, it's like me and Allie and Bree and, you know, other staff to help share that information. You know, what could that look like?
You know, there is a call to integrate youth voices, and that's really amazing. But having one youth on a board with 20 adults, like that poor youth, you know,
the tokenism.
Speak for all the youths, you know, there's diversity with youth, just like there's diversity with adults. And we need to recognize that. Be good adult allies to young people. Absolutely.
You know, there's so many projects we get proposed around like peer education that require you to be sober. And, you know, there's lots of times when I've been asked things because I'm in recovery. Well, it's been 22 years. It is way different. I am not the person to bring living experience to what is happening on the streets today. I, you know, watch it from the outside. I, you know, can talk about academic, you know, high, you know, level things. I'm not the person to bring a perspective of that. But, you know, you also don't need to be abstinent to offer that information. You know, and I look at all the folks around the drop-in, like they know so much, and it's not just about addiction, right? Like they know so much and they want to share that. And, you know, this idea, like we dropped out of 3 projects last year because the peers, you know, it was these peer development things and all of that stuff required abstinence. We see that with these larger advisory groups that work with government and that sort of thing. It's like, I see a lot of like old guys with like 30 years sober talking about these things.
They're going to talk about injection drug use and fentanyl today.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
and so like,
never done that.
I can sit there and be like, no, different.
Who's benefiting from our current policies? At a high level, who gets paid every time an ambulance responds to an overdose or a drug poisoning? It costs a lot. And the media doesn't seem to be shining a light on that.
No, well, and our EMS system is a privatized system, right? Like Medivy is an independent business. And, their success is based off of, how much money the province puts into them. But they benefit from, the cost of, that's, why ambulance calls aren't like widely covered, right? With EMS, I don't think they're like exploiting things. You see in the States, some places that have, publicly funded EMS and then these like privatized clinics that come in and like take all the money. But, here it is a privatized system. It does cost the province a lot of money because they're the ones where that flow of money is coming from. Nutrien isn't paying for our ambulances, right? With fire, like it's just, like it's such a misuse of resources and it's necessary. And, working really closely with fire, like what they've done through this. And the only reason we have any data at all is because they've openly shared. And the knowledge around this started with a text message through like fire in our EMO saying, we had 19 overdoses in the last 24 hours. Like, what are you seeing? And then it was like, well, yeah, like we had a lot this week. And so it was, became this like, okay, what'd you have today? What'd you have today? But, this is not where their resources should be. They shouldn't be stretched thin. They've had to bring in additional staff. So extra firefighters to be on shift, that's a lot of money. It's a strain from wherever they're being pulled from, and then we look at, our emergency rooms, which are already way overburdened with people who, come for all sorts of reasons. And then they have, ambulances bringing people who have overdosed, who at that point, observation is usually what needs to happen. EMS are having to stay there because they can't leave a patient until they've been treated if they've come or like started treatment until they come or if they come from an ambulance. So they're just hanging out in the halls with people, again, like strain on our resources. And so like we're not looking enough at the big picture of impact.
I mean, really, the research often bears out that like aside from some very limited low demand contexts, right? So sprained ankles, for instance, might be better addressed by a private care system. But when it comes to overall sort of health system management, ensuring there's appropriate public resourcing there lowers the costs everywhere, like multi-sector. Because when your health is hurting, it affects your employment. It affects your family's health and well-being. It affects your ability to contribute and be productive in the community. There's these huge ripple effects from this industry we might call health. And what we've seen sort of over and over, and we saw this during the pandemic, right? The care homes that were privatized provided substandard care for more money. When we privatize, we're not sharing the cost burden. We're not able to allocate resources over a larger thing. So basically the collective approach of public healthcare allows for pricing that is lower. It allows for service delivery for everyone, not only a select few. And we see this sort of over and over again. Unfortunately, what we've seen in our larger system, not just sort of in mental health, is that we're barely keeping pace with inflation. And then we're saying, see, public care doesn't work. Or our leadership is saying, see, public care doesn't work. We have to privatize. If we're drawing on private providers, there needs to be a standard of care that is implemented so that we don't see these disparities in care if you're in a public system versus a private system. And so that we're not seeing disparities in cost, right? If I have $80,000 a month, I can go to a fantastic treatment facility. But if I have $80,000 a month, I probably don't need that level of complex wraparound care that somebody else might need, right? So So, yay, capitalism. We are living in a society that champions profit over many things. And I don't think, like, as much as I might critique sort of private providers, I've never met a healthcare provider who's like, well, I'm here for the money, like literally ever, right? So it's not like the folks working as paramedics are like, yes, I'm here to profit for this particular
Unless you're
business.
a plastic surgeon,
right?
Think,
Like
those
right?
type of things.
There might be certain fields where folks are like, I can get paid very well for doing this, and I'm fostering people's autonomy and choice. Anyway, so there's certain fields, I guess, but generally speaking, in our health systems, it's not the providers. In fact, a lot of folks are leaving the public system to work in a private care facility because they are so overburdened and so overrun in the public system. They don't get breaks, they don't get their time off. They're not being treated well as employees, and so we're losing them from that public sector because of that lack of investment and so on. So, and I do think there's an agenda at play from government leadership where they do want to see, how do I put it? They have an idea that privatized care, that a private free market is going to provide better care. This idea that the private market is going to solve all of our problems is completely wrong. Yeah. It's wrong in certain industries anyway. So we know that it is incorrect in transportation. We know that it's incorrect in healthcare, and we know that it's incorrect in education. These are not supposed to be for-profit industries. They are how we invest in people, like you mentioned earlier about sort of Nordic countries and places where they're making an investment in people because then those people can invest in the rest of society and they're not costing as much money. When we make those early investments in people and in systems to support people, the overall costs go down across multiple sectors. So yeah, I do think that there's currently some leadership in this province that really believes in the idea of privatized care, making for a healthier province.
I think it's business.
I encourage them to look
Making
at other
business out of healthcare.
right, and I encourage them to look elsewhere for examples where that has never been true that we can find, except in some sort of niche pocket areas of healthcare. You can make a profit and deliver good quality care, but not in the most complex and concerning of cases, and not in a province that has about 1.5 million people in it. Our barriers are always going to be rural and remote access. We're always going to need, it's part of why we're the home of cooperatives and why we're the home of this community that cares and donates, and like that spirit that we were talking about. It's literally because we need each other in this province in a way that maybe you don't in other environments, but we do here. And I do keep hoping that our current leadership will hear that folks are less interested in that business investment model in healthcare and education. And will invest in people in those two areas at the very least.
Well, and this is why now we're
failed.
dealing with these pressures on emergency services because we don't have that primary health care. And, there's things like the urgent care center that's being built on, what is it, Avenue S. But, even in talking to, people within the healthcare system and managers and stuff, it's very unknown if they're actually going to be able to fill a gap. They'll fill some sort of gap, but when we look at our highest needs medical who are really taking up that room in Emerge, who, would be much better if they had access to primary care, are they going to capture that?
Yeah.
Are they going to be properly treating that? All of these things.
I'd love to see incentivizing family physicians to move to and stay in Saskatchewan.
Well, and that's
right?
the thing.
Like
we've
that
seen
kind of thing.
mass exodus of specialists and family doctors because they can't stand being here. That I hear at community meetings a lot. Well, we know what needs to happen. We just need the money. Yeah, we know what needs to happen, but we have to be able to pitch it to people that don't believe in it. And so, the hardest roadblock right now is how do we use existing policy? How do we use research in a way that they'll believe? Even looking at social return on investment doesn't seem to be impacting their decisions because we know it's way cheaper to do things this way. And that's where, a lot of people get fed up. We've had this, and sometimes there's 4 projects doing the exact same thing right now. The exact same thing. And you're like, okay, why aren't you talking to each other? But, for these bigger things, how do we bring the right people to the table, because you need people who are not on the streets front line. Like that's the reality. We can fuel a lot of information. We can, but we complain a lot. We need the people in the right positions to put this stuff together who have that access. And then, we need people who understand high level policy development to be able to put all of that together and take it into the policies. You need to know how to sell it to Treasury, because in the end, those are the ones that got to dole out the money. You have to always keep in mind, how are you going to sell this to Treasury and show them that the money's worth it? And so, we need Barb, who can pull all these research things, who I can message, randomly and be like, how do I find this? Do you have this? Right? And so we need that. We need government officials who are in there that want to fight for these things, who want and help frame the conversation in the right way.
Well, and folks in those roles need to be, listening to what folks who are working on the front line are saying. Like, hey, I can meet this person through an outreach program, and they can tell me, hey, I really need food and shelter. And then I say, neat, because there is no shelter. And, that doesn't work. So in a sense, we can meet people and try and do this, but then it's like, okay, that's a system gap. How do we connect this? Yeah. Is it because the service doesn't exist, or is it because there's not a connection between these services? How do we actually mend that to make that work? And I think that's partly when they've talked about the centralized intake line, I think it's a really good idea, but it was also you don't understand how things work right now, and what the task of actually doing that is going to be, and what it'll mean. And so when I heard the initial timeline, I was like, you'll never get that done in this time. But it was how do I put it? Everyone's naively optimistic about what they can do when they don't know how anything actually works. Yeah. And so learning how it actually works and mapping that system is critically important. I sometimes hesitate to even call it a system, because it's mostly a lot of really excellent human beings navigating a patchwork of different services to try and support people in need.
I get a lot of calls asking, from professionals being like, how do I find the methadone clinic? Well, it's actually super hard to Google the number. It's been a long time since I worked on Frontline, so I'm always when people call trying to find these things. But I had somebody that works in the health authority ask me if they had to order their condoms through me. And I'm like, I have to pay for mine. What do you mean? You want 2,000 condoms? And she's like, well, where do I order them from? I don't know. Who do you order stuff from? I don't have the answer to that. Right. But they don't know. No. So
communication is very fragmented.
And phoning mental health and addiction centralized line, and the person on the other phone doesn't know where to send you. Yeah. And so then, as a lot of people in my field end up telling people how to navigate those systems when we call them. It's the same, we do a lot of work with child protection workers, and a lot of them are brand new. And then you're sitting at a case conference where they're trying to decide to apprehend children. You're like, oh, no, you have to fill out that paper. That's how it works. So you need to make sure that the people doing those things are empowered and their capacity is built.
There is hope for change. I guess I want to say that this is fixable. All of these problems, which I know can be so heavy and so hard, and all of that, it is fixable. These are choices that we've made as a society. We can make different choices. It's, once you recognize you have a problem, you can make decisions to change that problem. And I think that's really where I hope people will take from this conversation is that this is all these are all situations that can be fixed when people are willing to change the way it's been or the way things are. We can get better outcomes. We can have a more synthesized system. It is entirely possible. It's going to take some work from a lot of folks. It's going to take some more allocation of dollars into different areas. Right now our mental health and addictions budget and within the health budget is 7.5% of the health budget. There are groups that recommend at least 12% of the health budget be allocated to mental health and addiction services. If we could even get get to 10. That would be helpful. It will just mean that everyone's not maxed out constantly all the time. It's not going to fix everything, but it's going to mean that people have a little bit of extra to give, and then we can harness that into actual systems change that will benefit everyone. So I always want to leave on the message that yes, things are broken, things are not working well. There's many places for intervention and change, but it is possible to make that change.
These are solutions for everyone. It's not just us. And that's where we really need to move the conversation and really bring everybody in.
Yeah. If you'd like to learn more about what they're doing over at Prairie Harm Reduction, if you'd like to make a donation to help them raise their building 2 feet, or if you'd like to learn more about Dr. Barb's work over here, all of those links will be in the show notes below. Kayla, Barb, thank you so much for joining me today. That's it. Take good care.
Thank you, Dan.
Hold on. For more context and tools tied to this episode, visit speakeasynetwork.ca. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment or review wherever you're tuning in. It really helps. And if you're ready for more, go ahead and click on the next video right here on the screen.